We will keep this discussion fairly flexible. We haven't actually discussed a lot before. We just collected during the last 2 days in our conversation some statements and thought, that's interesting, let's move forward, because this is exactly what we have to do. And we will have now a short statement from each of the ladies, and then we will open up and ask questions. And I know that we had many more statements to this issue that we couldn't all fit on stage. So please be now very active and let us know what you think about this issue. Would you like to start, Laura?
Voilà. So yes, I was asked to come here and give a short statement just a few minutes ago. So I will just say what happens in Danone with green electricity accounting. Basically, we were told by the people that are helping us put this system together that we couldn't take into account green electricity lower emissions in our calculation unless it was possible to prove that this electricity was not already included in the national grid, with which the different countries calculate the average emission factor for the country. So, so basically, I think that it is only in the case of the US that we were able to take into account these lower emissions. And our answer to all the different countries that were interested in investing in this kind of electricity was that, of course, directionally, Danone absolutely supports green electricity, and we want to go that way. But unfortunately, it is impossible for them to take these lower emissions into account in order to attain their targets. And so the choice is at country business unit level. If general managers would like to invest in this kind of electricity because they think it is good for their products and to communicate on the fact that they are actually investing in this kind of electricity, but not in order to use it for the calculations. So that's basically it.
Thank you very much, Laura. Maureen, would you slightly comment? You are familiar with the PAS 2050, as everyone knows, and yes. I think you have been called the mother of PAS 2050. I'm not going to repeat that. Of all standards. Oh, sorry. Look.
Standards, exactly.
It goes more.
Yes, the rationale that Laura has given is actually the rationale that underpinned what we finally ended up with in the revised PAS 2050, and which has already been referred to in the survey that was done and that we saw on the video. It is this issue of double accounting and the fact that it is, in some instances, difficult to get the emission factors where the electricity is renewable. And I think we heard from the presentation from Urban, he was able to, they are able to get the factors from their supplier, they're able to identify the supplier and so forth. In the UK, the emission factors that we use for grid electricity already have built within them an element for an understanding that some of that grid electricity actually comes from renewable sources. So this is where the element of double counting comes in, and I think it was felt that the PAS is a dynamic tool. It's not set in stone. So in 2 years' time, there'll be a further review of the PAS under the BSI maintenance program. And it was felt that at this point in time, there wasn't the sufficient knowledge there to be able to come down. And we wanted to be precise in the standard as to when and when you couldn't use renewable electricity or renewable power as a factor. And to that end, it does specify that providing you can actually quantify, you have the factors from your supplier, of course you may account for it, but if you haven't got that information, then you have to use the average grid factors.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Could Line continue maybe and quickly introduce yourself because you haven't had a presentation yet.
Line Jensen, I come from a company called ECOHZ. I represent a commercial point of view here. We work with a lot of particularly Norwegian power producers, and what we do is we sell green power. That's what we do, that's what my company does. So of course, I mean, I'm strongly in favor of using green power and well, take it into account when it comes to the carbon accounting. As Maureen says, I mean, well, the system we work with, because my company, we do not sell the physical electricity itself, we sell the green value of the electricity being produced from renewable sources. It's a system called Guarantees of Origin, or REC certificates, and it's a pan-European system based on the EU directives on renewable energy. It has not been implemented or adopted in the same way in all European countries, unfortunately. So as Maureen rightly points out, that for instance in the UK, we cannot prove that there is no double counting because the renewable value is actually not taking out of the residual mix, right? So then it becomes a problem for companies actually wanting to use the purchase of green power into their carbon or reduction in their carbon accounting. In other countries, the green value or the value of the renewable energy is actually taken out of the residual mix. So then there is no double counting. And the system itself of these certificates is actually built up the way it's an electronic system. So traceability is a key cornerstone in the whole system. So you can actually trace the origin of the renewable electricity you buy back to the origin, back to the actual power plant. And for instance, in Norway, where I come from, the system is built up the way that it is being taken out of the residual mix. So then it's a sound system, and you can actually trust. It's fully transparent, and there's no double counting. And it's the same with most of the European countries now. But still, yes, it is a challenge in some countries that we face the double counting issue.
Thank you very much, Lena. Cynthia?
So we've thought, GHG Protocol has thought about this a lot from the corporate accounting perspective. And in the corporate greenhouse gas standard that came out quite a long time ago now, we have some general guidance about how to report green emissions, green power that you would purchase directly on the grid from a supplier. If you know, just like what Lauren was saying with Danone, if you know exactly where the power is coming from that supplier, you could report those, the emissions factor from that supplier. But then over time, we've realized that that power is never subtracted out from the grid. So that's where one of the double counting issues comes into play. And because of that concern, we've now been recommending using the average grid factor. And that's why the confusion in that survey response about how CDP has different guidance. Their guidance now reflects our current thinking. And then we still say if you purchase a green power certificate, a renewable energy certificate, you need to report that separately from your inventory. So we're now seeing, though, that the market's evolving differently in different countries. There's all these new different types of vehicles that you can buy. So the market's gotten a lot more complicated in the last 10 years. And because of that, we're doing a lot more thinking on this issue. And we've convened a new working group around this to come up with new, what we're calling just power guidelines. And it's, the process is ongoing. We're hoping to have a draft coming out of the stakeholder process in February and finalize new power guidelines in the spring or summertime. If people are interested in participating, you can still join one of the technical working groups, so feel free to contact us. And I think what's interesting here is we haven't really thought much about how you would incorporate the emissions from green power into a product inventory, which is a slightly different accounting issue than in a corporate inventory. So I think it would be interesting to add that issue to the technical working group discussions.
Thank you very much. Who would like to add to this list of or range of perspectives? And I really encourage you not just to ask questions. This time statements are actually very welcome. And maybe just let's try to agree on one rule. Maybe let's not waste our lifetime on only stating what's not possible. Maybe you have rather some ideas, experiences, or just really rough ideas how you think it should be and how it should be solved. So let's rather make a list of wishes than saying double counting, double counting, double counting. Thank you. Who wants to start? I think we need a French view first. Olivier, it's your turn.
Yeah, two comments. The first one, just to give you the so-called French position, what is written at the moment in the French norm, the X30323, which is a basis for environmental labeling. You can only take into account green electricity if it is produced from a closed loop system. You know, you're directly connected to your renewable source. So it's excluded for the moment of the norm.
Connected means on-site generation,
yes.
Basically. Okay. Anyone else? There, Martin, Canada.
Hi, I'm Maxime Alexandre from the government of Quebec. Luckily enough, in Quebec, we are gifted as we have a lot of hydropower. It's about 35 gigawatts. For those of you that makes a rough idea, it's about enough to power 7 million inhabitants and a lot of smelters. So our grid is about 97–98% renewable already. So we don't really have, in this context, that type of question, I guess, because the whole grid is about renewable. However, for some other context, wouldn't it be possible to somehow subtract from the secondary data that would be located in EcoInvent or Gabi or such other database? Wouldn't it be possible to influence this already existing data in order to subtract somehow this energy and make it accountable when you have a specific contract between a producer and a utility? As this has been taught before, wouldn't it be possible to make it?
Laura, you want to react?
If anybody get what I mean?
I think it is something that should be answered by regulators. I can give only my personal view. I am an accountant, and there is nothing that can be done in terms of accountancy for that. There is quite a simple solution to that, to keep in accountancy separately for different kinds of energy. That's it. I think it should be quite simple, but it is more of a political decision that has nothing to do with private companies. So, I don't know if you have a view.
Thank you. Does anyone else has experience with green power or problems to account for it, either on the consultant side or on the user side? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, it's Craig Jones.
Hi, Craig Jones from England. I'm worried about if a few large companies sign up for green power, and then they product carbon footprint or LCA some products, and their products benefit from that. All these new assets get built to provide the green electricity, but that's not really they're not really tied into any commitment to carry on buying that green power. So then they might cancel the green power contracts to save money, for example, which means that those products no longer have a lower carbon footprint. There's all these extra assets around generating electricity, which has got no income at the moment.
I didn't fully understand. So why do they cancel the contracts? Because
well,
they can't account for it?
Maybe cost-cutting measures. I suppose I'm worried about companies signing up for a year or two for green power, doing some carbon footprints of products, etc. That can last a few years. Then if they cancel the contracts, those products no longer have a low carbon footprint, but consumers might be buying the product thinking that they still do. Does that make sense?
But this you always have. If you close the window in one winter, you save energy, and the next winter you leave it open. I mean, where's the difference?
Well, if you've done a product carbon footprint and you've allowed people to get almost zero carbon for the electricity from the buying for green credits, and then they no longer buy green credits a little bit later, I just think that's possibly an issue.
Okay. Anyone else? Who has experiences with this issue? Heinz Schmid.
If you need statements, we have a client in Switzerland producing salt, les Salines de Baie, and they have a power plant on their facilities, and they are Climate Up certified because they produce their own electricity. So we go along with the French system, and we have not yet accepted any kind of other renewable energy in our calculations, because in Switzerland what's happened, what you said, a lot of installations are 100 years old now, they're being sold as renewable, so that's not what we are going to accept. But we think there's a change in ISO coming up, that renewable energy will be calculatable in the future. And we have a lot of companies in Switzerland asking us, can we deduct renewable energy if we buy it? And for the moment we said, no, we do not account it. But we started talking to Norway, and we hope that we will be able to make some kind of certification scheme together with Norway, so that we could at least those type of energy we could accept in our LCAs, if ISO permits it then, and deduct it. Then we're sure that we really have renewable energy. And what we see in Switzerland is that we have a lot of companies who would be willing to buy green energy if they could deduct it also from the LCAs. So we're quite positive on renewable energy. But we're waiting for the international organizations to give the go, and then we will set up a standard which will really make sure that we have renewable energy, new renewable energy.
Thank you. We've heard several times this 100-year-old plants. Could you give us a perspective on that, Line? You don't deal with them anymore.
As you presented, that you buy certificates from plants that are younger than 6 years old, right? And in the renewable energy world, we actually have the same jungle of labels as in the carbon footprinting world. Maybe not as many, but quite a lot. And they're particularly labels from different NGOs. And in Germany, the strong label is something called EcoPower, which is being endorsed by WWF and ECOHZ. They will always have plants that are younger than 6 years, between 6 and 12 years, and then some part can be from power plants older than 12 years as well. While in Sweden, for instance, the strong label is called Good Environmental Choice, and they only accept power plants being constructed or being commissioned before the 1st of January 1996, right? So they only want the old power plants because they think that biodiversity around the power plant is so important that any new construction will actually harm the biodiversity and the surroundings of the power plant. And I mean, we have this large variety of different eco-labels, and they all have different sets of criteria. And of course, we have the criteria of additionality as well. And what is really additionality? True additionality is that what you pay for the renewable energy is actually going to fund a project that otherwise wouldn't have been constructed. But the truth is that, I mean, to construct a new power plant, it demands a huge investment. And of course, I mean, the power companies would have probably started that construction of that power plant anyhow. So there has come a new definition that is being discussed right now on additionality, that power plants that has been constructed during the last 3 years, that those might be actually considered as adhering to the additionality criteria. So, I mean, there are so many different views on this. And a power plant that was constructed, I mean, look at a power plant in Norway that was constructed 100 years ago. It could be that it's actually better for the environment and for the carbon footprint or that power plant, or that power being produced, that that plant is being upgraded instead of constructing a whole new power plant. So I mean, we have all, yeah, different opinions and different, well, different ways of calculating what is really the impact of the different type of power plants.
And we see that this, of course, is also mixing. It's not just in the hands of the standard setters, because this is just the accountant methodology, because it goes back into national inventories. And I mean, in the past, we have seen that electricity was a job for the state to basically increase the mix, but now we live in a more and more liberalized market, and now companies can purchase directly the electricity, which they formerly just got from the socket. And of course, it just makes sense to treat this electricity as any other product you have in your value chain. Who maybe is needed in addressing this question? Is it only WRI and ISO at a time, or past 2050, or do we, who do we have to take into this consideration? Do we have ideas on that? Cynthia, do you know? I don't know. Does anyone know?
I would say as a small answer, my company is food producer, and we have to print on the packaging the food legislation advices, ingredient lists, etc., etc. And there is not really, let me say, law how to make it, but there is so-called in Germany law advices, which are accepted by all people selling the products, for example, on German market. And what I see, we have not only, according to the green power, a lack of such advices available, which would be, let me for us, yeah, available, but for the whole PCF calculation. Yeah, there is no, let me say, how to report it. Yeah, each of one can calculate something, one number, and print in this number on the packaging, and nobody say about it something. Yeah, so it is different way in the food legislation. Yeah, there is people taking care if declaration are correct or not correct. Yeah, so I think there is a big polarity between food law declaration and the declaration what we are doing with a carbon footprint or using green power, whatever.
Thank you. What do you think, Christian Konrad? You always have ideas about most things. Wait. Good ideas.
I don't know, I hope so. Well, I think that there should be a positive solution to it, because you need the positive incentives for companies to actually switch to green power. Obviously, you need a good standard for it, a good standardized procedure for it, so that it is consistent also among countries eventually. But from my understanding from the discussion, it is not a problem in every country, right? It is a problem in some countries. So there is a solution. So I'm sitting here wondering, what is it actually that hinders those countries like the UK to solve that problem, if there are other countries where the problem is already solved? That's what I don't quite understand, what political interests may be behind it, because if more companies could offset it, there will be increasing demand for renewable energy, and there will be more renewable energy production.
Maureen wants to respond.
This isn't actually my area. This falls actually within the remit of another government department. So I've had to do a bit of hasty trying to get some information from them this morning when I was asked to speak on this panel. But I understand the reason why is the sheer complexity of the way we get our power supplies in the UK. I think it's so complex. It's not something something was sent to me. There was a debate going on in 2008 about this very issue. And listening to what's been said on the panel here today, the points, all of these points were made as part of that debate. So aside from Quebec, which seems to have a fairly not quite a unique position, but a privileged position in terms of green power. For the rest of us who are, for the foreseeable future, I would suggest having to have a combination of green power and grid power, or the other sources of power. I think there isn't going to be an immediate solution, which is why in the PAS 2050 we've gone for this approach this time round. It was the most practical solution at this time. I think I was discussing with Laura over lunch about how this might come together, and as she quite rightly says, shouldn't be an insurmountable problem. And I think, you know, I'm a great believer in putting people into a room and locking the door and not letting them out till they come up with a solution. Maybe that's one way it's going to happen. But I know certainly in the UK, there is a lot of debate about the power, the sources of power, and the electricity companies who are making huge profits, etc., etc. So there are political issues, but the complexity, I think, is the main reason at the moment. But it could be overcome if there was the will there to do it.
Thank you. Roman, John Child, do you have a perspective from the US on that green power issue? Could you give us a quick?
Well, I think I would just repeat what Cynthia has said, and from a verification point of view for inventories, we take a very close look at any assertion of renewable energy credits and try to make sure that the environmental attribute was separated, and that the person that uses the REC can prove that. And so I think the application of the rules in the US is fairly straightforward. But of course, the question then is, what should the rule be? I don't have any further to add, though.
Thank you. That's Kevin.
Thank you. Kevin Ram from SAP. I'm not an expert in electricity and accounting for green electricity, although I have performed life cycle assessments in the past and helped to contribute towards the standards and try to wrestle with this problem. And I think I'd like to echo what Christian just said, that we need a solution for this. I think that's one of the most important things, because we can see that green power is generally a good thing, and therefore when it comes to our work in product carbon footprinting and product environmental footprinting, it would be a travesty if we can't reflect on some of the benefits of using green power, and using the idea of companies with all their purchasing power able to create that kind of demand for green power by switching, with product footprinting, LCA being one of the incentives they have to show that they're doing the right thing and making an improvement in what they can do. So I think we have to start with the premise that it's a good thing to be able to account for green power. I guess if you look at the history of how different nations have looked at accounting for green electricity, I guess we have a few layers of complexity where incentive mechanisms have been put in place, and I speak for the UK at least, that incentive mechanisms have been put in place to allow companies to get some kind of credit, some kind of kudos for their green supply, and some market mechanisms. And that's really complicated the accounting. There's a history now of these things being put in place. I guess no nation, or very few nations, are actually isolated. Of course, we have interconnectors going across many different nation states, so you could see that there must be a broader requirement to get a very clean and crisp view on accounting, not just for LCA and product carbon footprinting, but for us to understand how this whole thing works together when you step back and look at the big picture. I think one thing that we could do as a community is, given that LCA has in the past earned a reputation for trying to get past some of the political problems, get past organizational boundaries, I would hope that as a community we can be very active in trying to lobby for a fairer way and for a juster way for accounting for electricity, green electricity in particular. And so I think we have a role to play And given that historically we've really looked at the essence of the matter, I think it's up to us to try to come up with some kind of mechanism that we think can work. And so there's an onus on us to get together, create a proposal, and lobby where we can to have something which makes sense.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this wonderful final statement. I think anything I could add would just ruin it, but you dare to do that, Isabella. Be careful.
Isabella Wagner from First Climate. I just got an idea, because I think the problem is the double counting. And if it's so difficult, for example, in the UK to trace back the electricity, why shouldn't there be 2 different emission factors? We could calculate on a yearly basis how much green power was purchased by all the companies and subtract that from all the green power, from all the electricity in the grid, and then have 1 emission factor for the companies that do not purchase green power and one emission factor for the ones that do. Then we could avoid, on a simple way, the double counting.
Yeah, that sparked something.
That is, thank you. Thank you for that. That is common sense. And so that is exactly what we were discussing over lunch. It is, it should be very simple in order to avoid double counting, to do exactly what I mentioned before, 2 lists and 2 different grids, and that would solve the problem. But I imagine that very intelligent people over there must have thought about this, and there must be something else I'm not seeing that makes it so complicated to apply, because if the answer is so simple, you know, I don't know.
So we got the solution. Fantastic. Who's going to write the email? Yeah, this we find out later. Thank you very much. Give applause to the panelists and to everyone stepping forward. Thank you very much.